We're just going to be checking the YouTube channel to see if it actually has gone live or not. I think it has. So for those just joining us, good, it's worked. Today we are doing a session conversation on finding sukha in dukkha and stability and impermanence, I believe is the title of the talk. So as usual with these conversations, Ajahn Kovilo and I will usually pick a theme and then just sort of have a chance to talk about it and ask some questions. We're working through the book Buddha Dhamma by P.A.P. Yuto in our Upasaka dedicated practitioners program, which if people are interested in joining, they can find details on our website. But at the moment, we're on the third chapter, which is on the three characteristics of dukkha, stress or suffering, or anicca, impermanence, dukkha, stress or suffering, and anatta, not self. So we thought this would be a nice sort of theme or way of approaching it in terms of finding the sukha in dukkha, the pleasure or happiness in suffering, and the stability in impermanence. So Ajahn, thank you for joining us, and thank you all 19 of the viewers who have managed to come on even through all the vicissitudes of our technical fun. We'll try not to let that happen again.
Yeah, no, what a great topic for finding stability in all the instability of Wi-Fi and different streaming platforms. And yeah, thanks for setting that up. And yeah, I find this kind of looking at the opposite side of the three characteristics to be fascinating. It's something which I first came across in the teachings of Ajahn Jeff. He's got Ajahn Thanissaro Bhikkhu. He's got a number of talks about testing the three characteristics, testing anicca, testing anatta, testing dukkha. And I think that's quite fascinating. And you really do, although it's not so explicitly talked about like in that way in the Pali Canon, you do see references to stability, to sukha, and even some references to self, at least grammatically. So Ajahn Jeff, his main insight is about looking at how concentration practice is a great way of testing these three characteristics. So by making the mind just as still and as quiet and as focused as possible, basically paying attention to every single breath or knowing your object as seamlessly as possible, you're testing this characteristic of impermanence because you're making the mind very permanent. With the jhanas or even, pre-jhana samadhi states, collectedness states, you're testing the truth of dukkha or unsatisfactoriness because you can get to some extremely pleasant mind states. I mean, two of the jhana factors, at least for the first jhana or this meditative absorption, is sukha, which is the opposite of dukkha. And similarly, this idea of self, at least on a conventional level in the way we think about things and talk about things on a normal day-to-day level, it just underlies pretty much the whole Sutta Pitaka. So at least grammatically, language speaking, the Abhidhamma really kind of takes the I or takes first person verb endings out of things. It makes it totally impersonal. It takes the self totally out of the picture, whereas you have the Buddha using first person pronouns, you have all of the Arhat disciples using them. The Buddha teaching, in the Anapanasati Sutta and elsewhere, I will breathe in experiencing rapture. I'll breathe in experiencing pleasure. I'll breathe in experiencing anicca. Thus you should train yourself, or this is how I can train myself. So yeah, that's just a bit of an outline about how Thanissaro Bhikkhu has pointed to testing these three characteristics on the level of samadhi. But I think it also does apply to the level of morality, the level of wisdom, and the level of even generosity or other things. So,
Thank you, Ajahn. I saw you pointing. Those strike me as, aspects of the path where sukha and, pleasure and stability are found. And yes, speaking about self in terms, or in terms of self, we started taking some notes on this beforehand, and I noticed there were some specific suttas that you'd brought up, and I was really curious about why and what your sort of thoughts were on them. So you have the Subha Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 99, and sort of wholesome self-confidence as I'm an ascetic. And then Majjhima Nikaya 61 as well. And I'm curious what made you bring those into the conversation at all, those two suttas?
So I think the ways of testing or exploring are really looking at and seeing, oh yeah, is it really true? I mean, the Buddha Dhamma is so much not a religion of faith. It's about experimentation, and this testing then works on many levels. So one level that it works to experiment with, how far does pleasure go? How far does stability go? How far does self even go? And there are places where the Buddha actually encourages like a healthy sense of self-confidence. So actually, to some extent, encouraging or at least allowing wholesome self-perceptions as a basis for a sense of well-being, leading to gladness and delight and pleasure, and then eventually to concentration. So that Subha Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 99, the Buddha talks about, someone who is an ascetic or who practices dukkha, basically, can think about themselves, I'm an ascetic. And if they do it in an intelligent way, they're not lifting themselves up and disparaging others. They can take that sense of, I'm someone who can bear what's hard to bear, can do what's hard to do. I'm someone who can eat one meal a day, or I'm someone who can fast, or I'm someone who can stay up late or meditate for many hours. That sense of being an ascetic, that there's an allowance there as being a basis for, in the Buddha's framing, gaining a sense of the meaning, the atta, and gaining a sense of the Dhamma, and from that gaining delight and gladness and pleasure, and eventually concentration. So that's kind of testing, in the Buddha allowing both a sense of self and really using dukkha to experience sukha. Like, even though on one level it's painful, to fast, even just eating one meal a day, or to not eat afternoon. But you can experience there's a physical kind of deprivation to some extent when you're new to it. But on a different level, there can be this mental well-being, like, the body feels light, and I'm doing something that's hard to do, and that's a type of training. So
I'm curious about that, Ajahn. It seems like for some of those, you're talking a little bit about how the Buddha allows, pleasure, stability, and a sense of, or an articulation of self to exist alongside these characteristics which undergird the whole thing. But then when you point, and you could have like the sense of self, like I'm a good carpenter, and that's a wholesome sense of self, it's fine. But there seems something very specific about the example you brought up of a samana, of a renunciant, in that, the title of this interview being like finding the sukha within dukkha and the stability within impermanence. It's not so much just the Buddha allowing these things to exist side by side for the sake of the path, but rather diving straight into that instability is where you find something much broader. And I'm curious about that transition, in that you pointed to it a little bit here with the idea of I am a renunciant, because in a sense of a homeless one, and finding stability and pleasure even in what the world perceives as not pleasurable at all. And I'm curious if you have more thoughts on that, not just the Buddha allowing those things for the sake of the teaching, but actually where you've seen in the Dhamma, in the teachings or in your own practice, actually diving straight into the three characteristics and coming out with something much deeper. And if you see that pointed to in the suttas at all. I mean, here, in terms of being a renunciant in that sutta, it seems to be pointing to it a little bit. So I'm curious, Ajahn.
Yeah, great distinction. And just so it doesn't seem so narrow, that sutta does also point to the perception, I'm someone who speaks the truth, or I'm someone who engages in study, or I'm someone who's generous. And from that, gaining a sense of the meaning, gaining a sense of the Dhamma. So it's not all about, it's not just for ascetics or monks. Another place this shows up like using like dukkha or anicca as a vehicle is, say, in the Salayatana Vibhanga Sutta. This is Majjhima Nikaya number 137. And the Buddha there talks about different types of feeling, or even different types of like mental well-being, of somanassa. And he says there's the somanassa of, or the mental well-being, the happiness of, he calls it like a lay happiness, like basically a pleasure, like the happiness or the somanassa of the world. And that's basically when I encounter or I gain, and I think about it as a gain, something that's beautiful. I see the beautiful painting, the beautiful person. I count that as a gain and I delight in it. When I hear the beautiful melodious sound, or I smell the fragrant perfume, or I taste the delicious dish, or I touch the very soft contact. If I think of that as a gain, that's like a lay sense of pleasure, or like a worldly sense of well-being. But the Buddha says that there's a different type of well-being which comes from basically the renunciate or nekama, or renunciate somanassa, where basically it's not that I take delight in the actual gaining of the pleasant sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, but I delight in the impermanence of it. As it's arising, I can still delight in that, and I'm not attached to the pleasantness of it, but to the anicca itself. So that's delighting in the anicca, the impermanence of things. I'm curious if this is, have you come across these teachings by Ajahn Thanissaro, or have you ever practiced in this way of looking at the opposite sides of the three characteristics?
Well, I think, like you pointed to, I mean, that's what samadhi practice is, and sila and everything. We're challenging the three characteristics as much as we're able. I mean, I know he talks about it that way, like with samadhi, you try to make, the Buddha says things are impermanent, so you try to make a mental state as lasting and long, robust as you can. And the Buddha says, phenomena have stress wound up in them, so you try to make a mindset as pleasurable as you can. And he says all things are not self, and so you try to gain as much control as you can. And then you force yourself into a corner, and that's where everything breaks away into awakening. So in that sense, yes. What I'm curious, where this takes me more, and hearing you talk a bit, is Ajahn, is the idea of, so the Salayatana Vibhanga Sutta, I love that one, and it speaks about, those renunciant pleasures of sort of delighting or finding a happiness within impermanence, and that's renunciant pleasure. What I find very interesting is when finding stability in impermanence and instability, and that there's another sutta where the Buddha talks about dependent origination and this sort of cycle of 12 links, and it's very complex. But then he says almost so often, or at least some places where he gives that teaching of this sort of vortex of shifting conditions, he points to these three terms, tatata, avitatata, ananyatata, thusness, not otherwiseness, and what is the other one? Like thusness, not otherwiseness, just this, something like that. And that is dependent origination, where he points to the stability in the process. So it's almost like Buddhism's this radical phenomenology where, though the faces of the conditions that we move through shift, we begin to feel a grounding in the actual process and how they come to be. And I think we all have that experience of like wondering why you're grumpy, and then you realize, something that happened the previous day, and suddenly it makes sense. Like you're like, oh, that's why I feel like this. And there's that huge settling of the heart in that moment. Or you can't figure out why someone is a certain way, and then you learn about their history, and suddenly it's like a puzzle piece clicks in. And for me, that's what like the term ta-ta-ta points to a bit in certain contexts, is just that groundedness of like that stability within the process, and seeing things connecting. And for me, that's a very intuitive and physical sense, but it is a refuge of sorts. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, Ajahn.
Yeah, that's I hadn't thought about bringing that those concepts in, but I think that is kind of looking at the I won't say the shadow side, because it's almost like the bright side of the three characteristics. People can read them and it's like depressing, like impermanent, not self, suffering. Like, why would I want to join a religion that's into that kind of stuff? Whereas what you brought up, this tatata, suchness, vitatata, not otherwiseness, yeah, ananyata, not different than that. Yeah, I think that is looking at the stability on like the level of wisdom, and there's like a sukha involved with accepting that level of dukkha of things. And so I do think that that's fascinating. One thing which, before we open it up to questions, I think it's important to touch on how these, let's call them the three, let's see if we can come up with a better name, like not the three counter characteristics, but the three, something. We'll call them counter characteristics.
As you talk, I'll try to think of something, but Good. You're better at this part than I am. So,
but these three counter characteristics, how they manifest, like in like on the level of morality, like people coming to Buddhism new, especially theravada. We do talk a lot about sila, about precepts, and that's helpful, but they're painful. I mean, like when you start, especially you take them on in the beginning, if you're not used to it, not lying can be painful, because if the people around you are used to you lying and you start telling the truth, that can be painful. And you're put like in face-to-face upfront connection with, impermanence and suffering. And it seems yourself is tested, because you're taking on a whole different version of yourself. But you see, as you like, especially when you go to live in a community or you start meeting more and more people who keep these precepts, it can be difficult for a time. But not eating afternoon, your body gets used to it. You live with a bunch of people and they're all doing it, and they've been doing it for decades, and it's no longer that difficult. And you work through it. You work through the dukkha because you have confidence. And you see the sukha manifesting, like a higher sense and a more subtle, a less conditioned sense of happiness that comes from restraint, comes from being able to give up and go without. And that's kind of like the essence of sila, is finding a happiness that isn't dependent on sukha. Being able to be with dukkha, but with a sense of well-being. Being able to see impermanence, but not be bowled over by it, and to have just a more healthy sense of self than a self which is just delighting in all the wrong things, like you mentioned, a self which maybe delights in or speaks unwholesomely. like you speak in an unwholesome way, and there's like a reverberation from that. There's this aftertaste, which just, when you become, sensitive to it, it's just bitter and gross and vile. So you become sensitive to that and start taking on different view of self, and it's painful, just like growing pains. It's like breaking out of the pod. So
what that reminds me of a little, Ajahn, is we're sort of riffing off each other here, but the idea that what the Four Noble Truths do to experience, in that when you don't have them, it really is being buffeted by the worldly winds, like pleasure, pain, and impermanence is part of that. And you really are at the complete whim or mercy of the three characteristics in the worst possible sense. It's like having a sailboat kind of with its mast up and just no rudder at all, and you can just be buffeted this way and that and capsize. What the Four Noble Truths seem to do is convert the three characteristics to, because the first noble truth, comprehending dukkha, it's intimately entwined with impermanence and not self. Like, we can't control what's around us, so that it does result in the sense of stress and suffering. But because the Buddha gives us this framework of the Four Noble Truths, by encountering it with a sense of nobility and uprightness, you're able to turn even suffering into the path. And there's a stability, like the word noble, like within that word noble, you have the sense of all three of these counter characteristics. You have the sort of stability of like a noble stance, like that stability, counteracting anicca. You have a sense of self that's wholesome or centeredness, like a noble one standing. You just disappeared, Ajahn. Come back. All right, well, I'm going to keep talking, and we're just going to watch as impermanence manifests. There you are. Hello, welcome back, Ajahn. And you have a sense of not just, also a sense of real glow, well-being. So by using the Four Noble Truths, it seems that that's what can transmute the three characteristics into the three counter characteristics of, stability, of the sense of uprightness found within this shifting realm, because it's like that sailboat suddenly is able to tack against the wind, and you're able to travel the same direction towards your goal, even when the wind's blowing the other direction. I don't know if that makes sense, but somehow what you were speaking about reminded me of that.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it brings up a something which I think is also important to point on, is that just like a skilled sailor, you can't fake it. You can't really fake having a stability in the Dhamma, or stability in precepts, and being able to endure dukkha, because you're put face to face with it. And this is something like, spiritual bypassing is a quite useful term sometimes, and it's possible for someone just to say, oh, everything is impermanent, everything is dukkha. Or I think I listened to a talk of yours last week or the week before, but talking about reveling in anicca. There's kind of this way of just like, basically partying with anicca and taking that as your primal kind of virtue, but not really actually able to, not having the skill to actually be with the dukkha of the path, and to really see impermanence on a deeper or more profound level, which comes from actually training the mind, from samadhi practice, from sitting meditation, which is another thing which you can't fake. You can't fake parami. You can't fake like accumulated spiritual skill. Basically, just like a sailor, you throw them in the middle of the ocean with the sails at fully up, and they won't. They'll sink or swim, basically, based on their skill level. So.
Thank you, Ajahn. Perhaps we could take a few questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, those are very good. Thank you for that discussion, though, Ajahn, truly. Let me see. And please type in questions you'd like to discuss. We have some time. My biggest need is safety due to living with years of abuse. What love and lost language addresses this need?
That's
Ajahn?
you. No, that's you.
All right. So 2 weeks ago, I gave a talk called The Four Lost Languages. And there's a famous book called The Five Love Languages, which a lot of my friends who were getting married began talking about. And they align quite well with a list in the Buddhist suttas called the saṅgaha-vatthu. And they include these ways of cultivating harmony that include benevolent sort of help, giving gifts or generosity, kind words, stability or quality time. And the fifth love language for the book is physical touch, but the Buddha doesn't include that. And one can look at the shadow sides of each of these with whatever our love language is, might include a loss language, basically how we perceive dukkha in our lives, in the world. So if our love language is receiving gifts, maybe our lost language is scarcity and being afraid of that. If our love language is kind words and receiving kind words, our lost language might be feeling like we're not going to be good enough or being afraid of that and always being sensitive to that threat of dukkha. If our love language is receiving beneficial help, maybe our lost language is feeling like we're never going to manage to do enough and manage to hold up what our life demands. And if our love language is stability and sort of quality time with another, our lost language might be a sense of instability and lack of control around us and just not being in control enough. So my biggest need is safety due to living with years of abuse. What love and lost language addresses this need? I think there's some primal love and lost language associated with that fifth love language that the Buddha doesn't include with the saṅgaha-vatthu of physical touch and just having a sense of safety in that. Although I know many abuse victims don't find that to be helpful. But I'd say this most broadly aligns with the fourth of consistency, samanatata, I think it is, although Ajahn Kovilo would know better than I do. And quality time, basically, where the lost language is a sense of inconsistency and not being in control. And that sense of abuse, so much of it's not having control and being completely at the whim of another, one's boundaries being compromised or invaded and having no ability to control. So I'd say it might align with that. Ajahn, do you have any thoughts?
I think it might be useful for you and I, or each individually, to think more about that fifth love language. I mean, in the 32 marks of the Buddha, the reason, each of the 32 marks has a reason. And the reason the Buddha has very soft and gentle hands is because of these four saṅgaha-vatthu, basically: generosity, kind speech, beneficial help, and evenness. And yeah, although you don't see in the Pali Canon the Buddha, touching the monks, you do see it in some Mahayana sutras, Shurangama Sutra, etc. You don't find it in the Pali Canon, but you do find it in monasteries. I mean, the whole tradition of like massaging these old monks, it's definitely not a sexual thing, but it's just an extremely nurturing thing. And even if people don't necessarily appreciate, for various reasons, like physical touch from or to other humans, animals, contact with animals or affection, physical touch from animals is an area which I think can be, helpful for people. But just that one thought to future note.
I really like that, Ajahn. I think that's true. Massages, it's like a pretty important institution in the monastic world. It's like when you get to really be just talk to senior monk in a really intimate way and just put down all of the kind of the hierarchy is not as big of a deal. You get to hear fun stories about devas and stuff, and it is significant, actually.
It's great.
Thank you, Ajahn. All right. What about the stability of standing still amidst the floods? Maybe an arhat feels this way.
Yeah, it's a great image, and it's one that the Buddha used as well. It's like just as, say, like Dhammapada, verse number 81, just as, wind will not knock over, a very well-rooted tree or a mountain. Wind cannot hurt a mountain. So too an arhat isn't moved by praise and blame, and similarly dukkha and sukha, or any of the 8 worldly winds, of which are pleasure and pain, gain and loss, praise and disrepute, and honor and dishonor. That's and I think the arhats are like the archetype, really. I mean, they're not really an archetype because we believe they exist. The arhats, they're not just a symbol for something, but it is possible for a human. And each of us believe that we've met and known arhats. Like, it is possible to completely cleanse the heart of greed, anger, and delusion. And how that manifests is in these counter characteristics. Basically, they're the happiest, people you'll ever meet, living in like the simplest, or like, you would most people would live a total life of dukkha if they lived like, Lumpur Liam, as an example, basically like underneath a hut, in the complete open, with like just a few pairs of cloth. So they're experienced like supreme epitome of sukha, supreme epitome of like stability. They're just, you can count them. They're not going to change. Their moods aren't going to dictate how they show up to you. And it almost, because of that, it really does shake up your ideas of a self, because while they can like manifest as, this self over time, it's almost like, Ajahn Chah, Ajahn Amaro talks about how, he had interaction with them where it just seemed like the personality of Ajahn Chah could just make it appear or disappear at will, and, just jump in and out of costume personalities, and just complete flexibility around self. So, thanks for bringing that up, Karen. It's a good point.
I might dip in really
Please,
quick,
please.
Ajahn, on just one. The image of water brings up for me a kind of, maybe the arhat experience is out of the realm for some of us, although I think it's really helpful as an archetype, like Ajahn Kovilo is pointing to. One thing I have noticed is often there's a lot of instability when you have kind of one foot on the bank of the river and one foot in the river of Dhamma, and it kind of trips you up. But I notice a really concrete moment in people's lives where it's like both feet are suddenly in the river and it's sweeping you along and you feel carried. And it's an experience of motion and of surrender and of intense impermanence because you've let go. And yet there's a huge stability in it and a grace that's not there when it's kind of like you've got one foot in your life and then one foot in the Dhamma. And it's, it's like the current keeps catching one of your feet. It's not really explicitly related to what you were talking about, Ajahn, but the image of water comes to mind.
It's especially difficult when you got crutches. So
that's true. And Ajahn, I might, we're almost at 6:45. I could open up Zoom and let you take a few of the final questions here. Would that be useful?
Yeah, let's do that. Great having a conversation with you, Venerable. See you over on Zoom soon. Okay.
And for those who want to come onto Zoom and meet Ajahn Kovilo and I there, we'll start up the meeting about now. And Ajahn Kovilo will stay here for a bit. And Ajahn Kovilo, we had one question that came on our Discord. Someone enjoys yoga, but it's not a very spiritual yoga. It's more just working on the postures and breathing. And they wanted us to record an answer about how they could make that part of the path. So I'll leave you with that.
Thanks, Venerable. See you soon.
Kap namaste kan, Kap.
That's good. Yeah, so I'm wondering if they're talking about like that sweaty yoga, like that hot yoga or something. Yeah, I mean, when you do yoga, you know, it really, what's important in Buddhism is not so much the body, but it is the mind. The mind is, you know, precedes all dhammas. It's the foremost, it's the chief. But we live, the mind is intertwined with this body for the rest of this life. And yeah, the Buddha did talk about mindfulness of the body, and it can be really grounding. It can be quite pleasant when you learn how to sit with good posture, move it with good posture. You know, this is actually one of the ways you can test the truth of dukkha. I mean, a lot of dukkha that people who are not yogis or people who don't aren't aware of their bodies, they experience a lot of needless dukkha. And that's one of the things about the Buddhist path, is that you just get more skilled at cutting away and letting go of the needless dukkha. So yeah, there's certainly usefulness in terms of getting a feel of your body from the inside, and learning to breathe well, learning ways to expand your lungs so you can breathe well. So there are many things you can take from yoga into your Buddhist practice. There's no contradiction. Maybe just the more you study about Buddhism, just see and explore for yourself like how you can take that back into your yoga practice. And yeah, I know different yoga groups are more or less sensitive to Buddhist practices. So there are lots of Buddhist yogis who are practice yoga for many years. So maybe reading some of their writings more of than if you're interested, than the people who are speaking of it more in terms of a sensual or beauty-based as the primary mode type relationship. So the next question is from Dave. Dave, I might hold off your question because you might already be in the Zoom room, and I'll go to this question from Diego. How can I help people I love who are not Buddhist to deal with anicca or impermanence? Sometimes my mother tells me she fears getting old, ill, and dying, but I'm afraid of just throwing Dhamma unskillfully at her. Yeah, I mean, just the fact that you're noticing that there are different levels of skill in how you bring these things up to people is not a given. You know, some people, they become enamored with Buddhism and they like, you know, throw these teachings at people as if they were, you know, functionally they're like ninja stars or something, basically just throwing them indiscriminately at everybody as if it's the right medicine for everyone all the time. Yeah, how can you get someone to deal with, anicca? One thing is just getting people to become familiar with anicca. So it's possible that more than impermanence, the real stickler here on this point is actually about suffering. Like, change wouldn't be so bad if we didn't suffer about it, if there wasn't the pain of the body and the mind that comes along with this change of body. So I think dukkha is really maybe a more fundamental problem. But just if you did want to help someone else become more familiar and actually get a tangible feel for anicca, is getting them to meditate on the feelings in the body. So you could start with having your mom just pay attention to the feelings in her hands. You know, this is an easy place to feel sensations, just this constant arising and passing away. And why this might be a good Dhamma door or a avenue into other teachings is that it can actually be pleasant. You know, as people get older, as our parents get older, looking at dukkha, on one level, it's not really a choice just because it's so front and center. But in another sense, people can just totally like put blinders on or just act as if they weren't feeling dukkha. So if you can get people to experience a measure of sukha and a measure of stability while looking at impermanence, that can be quite helpful. So basically, if you can get her to do lying down meditation, that's something which can be easier for people who are new to it. I know I've got family members who just aren't into Buddhism, but they just can't sleep well. So basically, looking at the body, scanning the body, feeling the changing sensations, and maybe for people who are new to it, not emphasizing looking at the dukkha, bring that in over time. But basically, just relaxation practices that involve feeling the subtle sensations in the body. So that's just one idea. If it isn't pertinent to the discussion, please, I apologize, and feel free to ignore my question. No, it is pertinent. So let's see. I think some other people may have already probably gone over to the Zoom room. So yeah, I think everyone else is regulars. So, and if not, feel free, please bring up the question at the YouTube. In our Zoom room. So Tanisbo posted the link, I believe, and you can just click that, or you could go to clearmountainmonastery.org and go to the calendar, and then just join us over there for an interactive discussion. And Tanisbo, as per usual, will be teaching in person at St. Mark's Cathedral in Seattle, and I believe I'll be giving the teaching next Wednesday. So I hope everyone has a good week, and hopefully see you next week on Wednesday, same time. Okay, goodbye.